In this screencast, we're going to be looking at how hydrogen bonding and the fact that water is a polar molecule, how that explains some very important properties of water. So these important properties that you need to be able to talk about is cohesion and adhesion, the thermal properties, and the solvent properties of water. These properties are very important for life on Earth. So you need to be able to talk about what is it structurally about water that allows it to be cohesive and adhesive, right? But then also, why is that important to life on Earth? The same with thermal. What is it structurally about water that gives it these cool thermal properties? And then why is that important to life on Earth? So for each of these, we're going to talk about the structure, the chemical properties of water that allow that to happen, and the importance for life on Earth. Okay, so cohesion is the first one. So here's some very pretty water molecules, much prettier than the ones that I drew. So you've got the oxygen with two hydrogens, and you see how they've marked the charge. So we've got the positives by the hydrogen ends and the negative by the oxygen ends. And any water molecule will generally can bond with up to like 4 other water molecules. And you can see the way that they're attracted to each other with hydrogen bonds. Okay, so these hydrogen bonds have formed because water's polar. Okay, because it's got a positive and a negative charge, right? So because water's polar, it can form hydrogen bonds with other molecules because the positive end of the hydrogens are attracted to the negative ends on the oxygen of a different water molecule. So water molecules are attracted to each other because they're polar, and that forms hydrogen bonds. Cohesion is the attraction of one water molecule to another. So the fact that water molecules tend to stick together, and you know how you can kind of overfill a glass where it's just got that surface tension over the top, that's because of cohesion. Water skippers can jump across water partially because of the cohesion of water. So water does tend to stick to, water molecules tend to stick together. That's similar to adhesion, and adhesion is that water molecules tend to stick to other materials like soil or the surface, inside of a tree. And because water can stick to other things, that's what we call adhesion. So these hydrogen bonds will form between water molecules and other particles. Now, why are cohesion and adhesion so important? Well, the absolute most important thing for this is transpiration of water from the roots of like a tree or a plant to the leaves. You have to move water from the roots to the leaves because photosynthesis requires water. Photosynthesis happens in the leaves, but the water that the plants get come from the roots. So you've got to be able to move that up. That movement of water is going up what's called a transpiration stream. Well, the water can move up like that because as water evaporates off the leaves, when one water molecule leaves through evaporation, it's going to tug on the water molecule behind it and tug on the water molecule behind it. And each water molecule in the chain, as it goes all the way down to the roots in these tube-like things called xylem, they're vessels, it's going to pull on each water molecule behind it. And so it can actually tug the water all the way up the tree. And the water also doesn't slide back down because it adheres to the side of the xylem walls. So water molecules stick to each other all the way from the leaf down to the root. That's through cohesion. And then the adhesion is that they also are attracted to and stick to the surface of the xylem vessels inside the tree. So the transpiration stream is very important. Otherwise, photosynthesis wouldn't be able to happen. We can't fix light energy into chemical energy through photosynthesis. Very important in the food chain. All right. So you need to be able to explain how the chemical properties of water allow it to be cohesive and adhesive, and then why is that important to life on Earth? Okay. All right. Let's look at the thermal properties of water. So water is very good at regulating temperature within cells, and it's also good at regulating temperature on the Earth itself. So if you're anywhere near water, like an ocean or even a lake or other things like that, water tends to not change temperature as quickly as air and land do. Well, that's because water has a very high specific heat. What that means is it takes a whole lot of energy to actually change the temperature of water. So you have to put in a ton of energy for water to change temperature where it'll change more quickly on land or air. Well, the reverse is true because, it takes a lot of energy for the it can lose a lot of energy before it changes temperature to be cooler too. So water really helps regulate temperature, and that's great because we want to keep a constant body temperature, right? And since we're made mostly of water, we're able to do that more easily and efficiently because water has that high specific heat. And then again, lakes and oceans and other things like that, they can keep a nice moderate temperature for life that's living within them. Water also has a very high boiling point. It's liquid at normal temperatures on the planet, so it takes a lot of energy to get it up to the point where it's going to turn into a gas and not be as useful to us. Something else that water can do is evaporative cooling. When water molecules evaporate off of a surface, because it takes a lot of energy for them to get to that point, it actually leaves the surface behind. When it leaves the surface is then cooler. So that's why sweat works. So when you've got all these molecules, water molecules on your body when you're sweating, and when one actually evaporates, that's taking heat energy, to do that. And that heat energy is left, and all the water molecules left behind are actually cooler than the ones that, evaporated off of you. So sweat cools off your body, and that works, evaporative cooling for a number of different things. So in general, water is very good at moderating the temperatures. Now, why? What is the chemical properties of water that allow it to do that? Is because of the hydrogen bonding. Water has these hydrogen bonds between it, right? Between the molecules. That's what takes all the energy to kind of break them and pull them apart. Now, granted, you can pull hydrogen bonds apart easier than, say, the covalent bonds within a water molecule, but it still takes more energy than it would for other types of molecules like methane that don't have this dipolarity and hydrogen bonds between them. So it doesn't take a lot of energy to pull apart, methane molecules, right? But at the same time, it actually takes a lot of energy to do water. So water is very good chemically to be able to allow the structure of it allows it to have these thermal properties. So you need to explain why water is so good at regulating the temperatures in and around organisms. And then, of course, you explain what is it about the chemical nature of water that allows it to do that. Something kind of cool that also helps regulate temperatures for water is the fact that when water is at 4 degrees, is when it's 4 degrees, Celsius, just above freezing, it's actually the most dense. Once it freezes, these hydrogen bonds kind of create this cool lattice structure, and ice is actually less dense than liquid water, so it floats, which is very handy because if ice, like other solids, were more dense than its liquid form, ice would then fall to the bottom and it would never thaw again. So the fact that water, as a solid, stays at the surface, it actually can insulate a body of water. And then, and it's also available to get the heat molecules from the sun and other things and eventually melt. Because if it was more dense, it would go to the bottom, it would never get that heat and never melt. So the fact that solid water is less dense than liquid water is a very rare chemical thing. And again, it has to do with that hydrogen bonding. Lastly, because water is a very good solvent because of its polar nature, right? You can see here's sodium and chlorine, that's from salt. So here's a salt molecule. Water can dissolve that really easily because it has both positive and negative parts to it. So you can see all the negative oxygens are surrounding the sodium and all the positive hydrogens are surrounding the chlorine. And so it makes a really good solvent for anything that is polar, that has a charge. And that's really important to life on Earth because we use liquid, we use water to transport things within our own body. So think about our blood it's an aqueous solution that has all of these different things that are dissolved in it to move around. Single-celled organisms, that's how it passes things across the membrane. So it's really important that water can actually move these ions that are crucial to living organisms. Okay, one more thing that I just wanted to share with you, a little bit of a comparison between the thermal properties of water and methane, because I had talked about that before. Remember that water is polar. Well, methane is not polar. It doesn't have a charge in any one direction. So because of that, when you're comparing methane and water, what you would want to pay attention to is the fact that water has a very high boiling point where methane, it's already a gas at negative 160. So it's already gas. And, the melting point is like negative 182. So But here's a really important one, the latent heat of vaporization. This is how much energy goes along with water when it evaporates. That's why it's such a good coolant. Where methane, it doesn't take that much energy to get it to vaporize. And the specific heat capacity of water is way higher. It's double than that of methane. You don't have to put a lot of energy into methane to get it to change temperature. Okay, so just realize that water, its properties, if you're comparing it to something like methane, that dipolarity is why it has such a high boiling point, why it has such a low, why it has this large range of being liquid, and then also that heat of vaporization, why it can take so much energy away and change the temperature when it evaporates, and then again that specific heat capacity keeps it from as that liquid, it keeps it from changing temperatures too rapidly.